Diabetes Connections is brought to you by inhaled insulin, glucose management in the moment, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, a student athlete diagnosed with type 1 just after her very first season at college. Bri Carrasquillo had reached her dream of playing lacrosse at Yale, but then she explains she had to figure it out all over again in May of 2020.
Find your community as soon as you can, as soon as possible. I think for me, one thing that was huge was just establishing a sense of community through social media. I had at the peak of COVID, I had a fitness account and I kind of turned it into a diabetes account because I was like, all right, I don't know anyone with type 1. I need to figure that out.
Bri is part of the very first class of Dexcom U, a unique program that's happening under the brand new NIL ruling. We'll explain what that is, what it means for these student athletes, and get advice from Bri about balancing it all at a very high level. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and my son was diagnosed with type 1 16 years ago this month, right before he turned 2. Yeah, he is almost 18 now. We've been at this quite a long time. My husband has type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, and that is how you get the podcast. And speaking of that background in broadcasting, I was really honored to take part recently in a great project going on by the greatest media classroom. That is what we call WJPZ. That is my college radio station. I'm a grad of Syracuse University, and WJPZ, if you'll indulge me for a moment here, is not part of the university officially. It is owned and operated by the students, and there's a lot that went into that decision. It's a very unique radio station in terms of college radio stations across the country in that it is run very professionally. When I was there, they gave away a car, and they competed with the commercial radio stations in town. The radio station is marking 50 years, and the Alumni Association is producing a podcast. It's WJPZ at 50, and I was asked to take part recently. So my episode was just released. If you follow me on social media, I have linked it up. I will put it in the show notes as well. But you can also search WJPZ at 50 wherever you're listening to this podcast. And it was really fun to talk about my career, my expectations when I got to college, what I wanted to be when I grew up, and what has happened since. So a big honor to be part of that. Syracuse University, of course, has a lot of really famous broadcasters. So I was really touched that they reached out and asked me to speak about my experiences. I've gone back quite a bit over the years to talk about podcasting, which, no surprise, a lot of the students are interested in. And I think they just started offering a class on that, which I think is very cool. I would actually like to teach that class, but I want to do it from beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina, and not snowy Syracuse. I had enough of my time up there. Love it up there. Great people, but very cold. Okay, on this podcast this week, I really enjoyed this interview with Bri Carrasquillo. Not only is she very well spoken, but she had a lot to say in terms of the adjustment, right, when you're diagnosed in college. Forget being a student athlete, but just at that age when you're becoming more independent and then you have to go home and you have to figure it out and your parents are worried. She talks a lot about how she dealt with that. And of course, she talks about being an athlete as well and some really good advice in terms of management. Dexcom announced this Dexcom U program to a lot of fanfare during November, during Diabetes Awareness Month. There's a video that explains all about it. I will link that up. It's very well done. ESPN's Adam Schefter is the anchor for it. He makes the announcements. We've actually had him on the show before. He is married to a woman with type 1, so he does have that connection. But Dexcom U is a partnership now with 14 college athletes who are living with diabetes. And Dexcom says this program aims to inspire the diabetes community and further educate coaches, teachers, and support teams. And it looks like they're going to keep this going. They say this is just the beginning, and they'll be adding more student athletes as the program goes along. This is made possible because of the NIL policy that was approved last year by the NCAA. So this is the Name, Image, and Likeness policy, which allows student athletes to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness as of July 2021. There's a lot more to this. There's a lot of state-specific rules. still have to be careful about pay for play or different financial incentives. I will leave the details for you to look up. I will link up some frequently asked questions and that kind of thing. But this ruling makes it possible for companies like Dexcom to work with college athletes. I'll let Bri tell more of her story, but as I said, she's a lacrosse player at Yale. Her sister goes there as well. Bri was diagnosed in the spring of 2020, just after everybody had been sent home for COVID, just after her very first season at Yale. So there was a lot going on, and you'll hear from Bri in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And since starting this podcast, one of the highest interest topics has been Afrezza inhalable insulin. I am so excited to partner with them to tell you more. Afrezza is an ultra-rapid-acting mealtime insulin. You breathe it in using an oral inhaler. Once inhaled, Afrezza passes quickly through your lungs and enters your bloodstream in less than 1 minute and may start reducing blood sugars within about 12 minutes. Find out more, see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease, such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on afrezza.com/safety. Bri, thanks for joining me. I can only imagine how busy you are. I appreciate you taking some time.
Yeah, of course. It's so great to be here. I'm so happy to be able to sit down with you, or virtually, of course, but be meeting you and have the opportunity to speak on your podcast today.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Let's just kind of start at your beginning. When were you diagnosed with type 1? How old were you?
So I was diagnosed on May 11th of 2020. Actually happened to be the day before my sister's birthday, so she'll never let me live that one down. But yeah, this was in 2020. So right after my freshman year lacrosse season, it got cut short due to COVID. About a month after I was home, just kind of relaxing, and, gyms were closed and everything. So I was kind of taking my fitness, outside and things of that nature. And, slowly but surely, I kind of got really sick after a month at being home, and, kind of all the symptoms came on at once, and ended up in the children's hospital during COVID.
Wow. So again, being kind of nosy here, were you already 18 at that point?
Yes. Yeah. So I was 18. Of course, due to the COVID restrictions, I wanted my parents to be with me in the hospital. So my pediatrician at the time as well also just kind of referred me to go to the children's hospital, stay overnight a couple days with both my parents.
Yeah, I ask about your age because that's such a tough age. When you are, you've already spent a year at college, you know how to be independent, you've come home, you thought, between COVID and everything else, who knows, but, just for the summer, and then you're hit with something like this. I have so many questions, but let me just start with, how did you and your parents talk about this at that age? I mean, my son was diagnosed so young, it was such a different situation.
Me being 18, I was, of course, young, not as young as typical type 1 diagnoses are. But, young and naive and kind of just in denial for the first couple of months. I think after when I was with my pediatrician and, she kind of sat down with me and told me the news in the doctor's office, I remember just tears kind of rolling down my face and kind of, they were uncertain, but, they were also really sad because I knew it, couldn't be good. But at the same time, I didn't necessarily know what it meant. And so, my mom just kind of looked at me and was like, oh, yeah, I had done a Google search and I kind of had a feeling that that's what this was. And I was like, okay, when were you going to tell me that? But, nonetheless, it was, kind of just a thing where we talked about it briefly in the car on the way to the hospital. And then the rest is history. I just, kind of just sat myself down and was like, all right, this is my reality. And kind of just let the diabetes educators take it from there.
So you've already been at college for a year. You've obviously been playing this sport for a lot longer than that 1 year.
Yes.
What did you ask about? What went through your head about lacrosse? It had to be one of your first questions.
Yeah, of course. So, I had been playing lacrosse since second grade. It was practically instilled in me at birth. The very first question when I sat down with the diabetes educator, I was like, can I still play lacrosse? Is that okay to do? And she was like, yes, absolutely. The very first words that came out of her mouth was, diabetes does not define you. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm set. And so there was just this immediate like sigh of relief being like, okay, I may not know entirely what this diagnosis means, but at the same time, it doesn't stop me from doing something that I love. And, kind of carrying that into, still playing throughout college, it hasn't stopped me.
Well, what was that like when you did go back, or I guess even back to training? Do you, at the level that you are, which is, an incredibly high level of college sports, did you talk to the coach? Do you have a trainer? Do you mind sharing some of that? Especially I'm thinking of the parents of student athletes and high school athletes that may be listening. What can they expect with something like this?
Yeah, sure. So I initially, while I was in the hospital, I, have a great relationship with my coach. I just kind of was like, hey, Erica, do you have a minute to call? And I think we had during, again, it was during COVID. So a lot of like our team meetings were on Zoom at the time. So I was like, hey, like I'm not able to make the Zoom call. I'm actually in the hospital. And at the time, like I didn't really know exactly like what was going on. So I called her like the next day and was like, hey, I just found out I have type 1 diabetes. And, of course her immediate response was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, how can we support you? And, I think that's kind of been a common theme throughout all of my supporters, whether it be friends, families, athletic trainers alike, is, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But also, next steps looking forward, how can we support you and still give you the experience that you want at Yale and, playing the sports that you love and doing the things that you love to do. So I think, in talking with my coach, I kind of we sat, I think we FaceTimed actually, and kind of just discussed, all that it entailed and, my carb counting cycles and how I have to plan for workouts and just the, calculations associated with that. I also kind of went through it with my athletic trainer before I got back on campus, which kind of just streamlined that process and made it a little bit less stressful. But, it was awesome, honestly, having them. They were, incredibly supportive throughout the entire process from, the moment that I had told them.
That's great. So what was it like when you started to actually practice again and play again? I've got to imagine there were some ups and downs. Maybe you're perfect and everything went great. I don't know. We just met, but I assume there were some ups and downs.
Yeah, no, for sure. I will say there's, one thing about having that perfectionist mindset and having type 1 diabetes, they don't necessarily go well together. And, I remember one time I'd gone for a run, like, maybe a week after I'd gotten out of the hospital and I started feeling the symptoms. I didn't realize at the time because, they just tell you straight from the textbook, oh, dizzy, shaky, sweating, things of that nature. And I just remember being so confused and I just had to like sit down and I just called my endo immediately and was like, hey, like, what can I do? Like, I was just like kind of just ranting onto them. I was like, I am, a D1 athlete. Like, I am trying to run. I'm trying to play lacrosse right now. Like, and I keep going low. Like, I don't know what to do about this. I was like, is this something that's going to happen every time? Or how do we go about, remediating these severe hypo effects right now? And, it's definitely a trial and error. It was not perfect in the slightest. It still isn't perfect. But I think just the more repetition that I've gotten, especially I think, my sophomore year going back into college and playing, lacrosse, and lifting and understanding the different types of workouts and how it affects your blood glucose levels, it all really helped because now, I still do have my ups and downs, of course, but, there are practices where I'm totally fine. I'll just go in, I'll have a Cliff Bar or something like an hour before, and, I'll come out and I feel great. So definitely it took a little over a year. It's going to take some time, ups and downs. It has its ebbs and flows. But, I've said, I feel as if I've kind of got a good rhythm going so far.
Well, we're connecting because you were part of, Dexcom U's program, and that's how I found you. And I'm really excited to hear more about that program. So I assume you got a Dexcom pretty quickly. Do you mind sharing the technology that you use?
Yeah, sure. So I had got the Dexcom. It was within a few months of being diagnosed because I was like, hey, I have to go back to school. Like, what should I do about this? And so, my endo was like, oh, like, we'll get you on the Dexcom. We'll get you on an insulin pump. So I remember being so nervous to try it because, like many people, I'm, not a huge fan of needles. And I just remember being extremely scared of, having this very visible piece of technology on my body and, having, what if people stare and, things of that nature. And then, I remember when I first put it on and, I saw the first glucose number pop up on my phone and I was like, wow, this is so cool. I don't know why this would be something that I could ever be ashamed of because it helps me so much, like in my, day to day, in my sleep, it's much better than having to wake up at, 2 a.m. for the first 2 weeks of my diagnosis to make sure that I didn't have a hypoglycemia. So with the Dexcom NIL process, I think this was a couple months in, like I said, like kind of just right. This was in July, maybe of 2021. So I guess a couple months after I had sent Dexcom a DM. I was like, you know what, let me just put myself out there. Let me just try. And I was just like, hey, Dexcom, my name is Bri. I'm a rising sophomore at Yale. I'm on the lacrosse team. I wanted to see, now with the NIL regulations coming out for NCAA athletes, like, I just wanted to get your take. Are you guys doing sponsorships or NIL deals of that sort? Do you have room? Is this something I could be a part of? Like, I was just recently diagnosed, but I want to find ways to get involved. And I also want to find ways to inspire other people and, use my platform for good. So it kind of just went from there. They responded like a day or two later or something. And they were like, hey, like, we'll email you some materials. Like, we'll get connected on a call. And, we'd love to have you as part of our program, as part of a Dexcom Warrior is what it initially started out with. And then it eventually trickled down. I got an email about the Dexcom U program, which I was, of course, ecstatic about. So yeah, it kind of segued from there.
That's great. Obviously, everyone is different in their management. I would never ask you to give medical advice, but I am curious, like, what works for you as a high-level athlete? I'm thinking of all the sports my son played because, you played since second grade. He's tried every sport. And just when I feel like we figured out diabetes, he moves on to the next one. What kind of worked for you, if you could share maybe routines or trial and error stuff, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So as far as routines go, I would say like I was a little bit of a scatterbrain at first, trying to just figure it out. Like I said, like going back to the like perfectionist mindset, like it was just a little bit frustrating at times, not being able to figure out something that didn't work for me if it didn't work right in that instance. And so it led to a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation. And then I kind of got on the routine of, hey, okay, let's try this snack out for this type of workout, see if it works. If it doesn't end up working, we'll try something else next time. For example, like if I knew I was going to go up to the field and play lacrosse one day, I'd try a Cliff Bar. And then, okay, maybe like it brought my blood sugar up a little bit too high. I'd say, okay, well, what can I change about it next time so that going into my next practice, it's not having a high blood sugar at that moment. And so it's just little like minor tweaks. If I find something that's able to elevate my blood sugar and sustain it for a long period of time, for me, that's a win. And then it's just going forward. Okay, how can I modify that? Thinking of, can I eat this 10 minutes earlier than I did last time? Or can I stay for a little bit longer and shoot or get some sprints in at the end? Or, just little things that I can incorporate here and there to ultimately find that balance. It was an arduous process, I will say, but it was something that I personalized to my lifestyle. Again, it was type of thing where you do need to trust the process, but I will say that I do have a routine now in my junior year where, it's just kind of go into the locker room hour before practice starts. I'll have a Cliff Bar. I'll wait for my blood sugar to go up a little bit. Once I see it, I'll grab a fruit snack and my water and, my phone to take out to the field with me. And then, I'll have my athletic trainer be holding my phone so that my Dexcom's near me. And if there are drops, if I do feel like I might be a little bit dizzy, I'll have the fruit snack as a backup. But yeah, that's kind of the routine that I found that works best for me so far.
Yeah, and lacrosse is such a grueling sport. I know they're all grueling in their own ways, but that is, it's just nonstop, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is a fast-paced, intense, very competitive sport. That's another challenge is, it depends on the type of activity. It depends on the type of sport that you're pursuing. And, especially with lacrosse, it's very stop and go type of movements. And so, I had to find exactly what works for me. And, whether that's suspending my insulin pump for the entirety of practice or loading up on Gatorade or something before it to try. There are days too that I will say, one day we'll be scrimmaging the entire, hour or two of practice. And the next day we're doing small-sided drills. So it really depends on, what specifically you are doing that day. So, yeah.
Yeah. What about your teammates? Was there any reaction? How did you tell them? What did they think? And do they help you out? Do they look out for you? Or is it kind of every man for themselves?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say one thing about my team is that our chemistry is unmatched. And so my core group of friends all happen to be on my lacrosse team. And I remember texting them when I first got into the hospital and we FaceTimed almost immediately. I was like, hey guys, I just got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And, I just remember kind of showing them my little, okay, this is my insulin pen and this is what I do in my little Baqsimi jar. And everything of that nature. And, of course they have my best interests, like my coaches, my teammates, everyone has my best interest. And so their concern was really, okay, well, how can we support you at school? And that was something that I really appreciated. I think my teammates are the same way. They actually just in lift, we had a lift last night. I felt my blood sugar start to drop a little bit. So I ran over to my athletic trainer and I was like, hey, do you have the little like glucose gels that I could borrow? And like, I saw some of my teammates watching me and they were always being cognizant of when they just kind of can sense it. If I'm whether it's me stepping out of a rep in practice or, me just sitting down to, catch my breath and take a sip of juice or something like that, there's always at least one or two people that are around to support me and be like, hey, Bri, are you okay? Like, is there anything I can do to help? Which is, of course, huge. I think the support system is probably the most important facet of, having a solid foundation in your diabetes management.
That's awesome. So this is more of a mom question than a diabetes question, but like every time I meet a student athlete like yourself or talk to one of them, I'm like, how do you do it? How do you find time for all of this? It is incredible to me. The course load I'm sure you're taking, the sport, the travel. Is there an answer to that question? I mean, how do you sleep, right?
Yes. Yeah. Believe it or not. Yes. I mean, it's a balancing act. It is one giant balancing act. I will say one thing for me that I like just on my day-to-day schedule is, I love to just tick the boxes and have, my GCal just be filled every day. And I know that probably sounds like a little bit counterintuitive. Why would you want to have this crazy hectic life on top of having diabetes? But I feel like in a way, I'm sort of priming myself to be able to tackle any of the challenges that come my way with diabetes. And so, I just like having to physically be at different places at all different times of the day because it kind of takes my mind off of the, 180 plus thoughts that I have that are diabetes related on my mind. It's a huge balancing act, but I will say I'm so grateful for the lacrosse and being able to pursue lacrosse and education at an institution like Yale has been, a surreal experience. And so it's definitely guided me with my diabetes management in that way.
Let me ask you this. I remember from when my son was wrestling, there's lots of sports that it's tough to figure out where you're going to put your diabetes technology, but he was really sweaty. I mean, that was one of the more difficult sports we had. Is there anything particularly challenging? And again, I know it's nosy, you don't have to share too much, but like keeping the gear on when you're running and trying to figure out where to place it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely something that I encountered this fall, especially granted that it was surprisingly hot during a lot of our practices. And playing a contact sport, I mean, it's different. Yes, like I was used to it playing in the humidity in Georgia, but then you come, back to school and you're playing against people and the like constant contact and constant, bumping elbows and, getting bruised up and stuff definitely became an issue. I will say I found Skin Tack, which I have been loving. That's one thing that I always make sure, whether it's my Omnipod or my Dexcom, that, I'm always applying before. And then I try and like notice patterns of, okay, like there are moments that I have where I'll put my Dexcom on and the same day, but like a couple hours later after practice, I'll notice that it's like coming off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a little bit painful. Like I have to go replace it now. And, there are times where it's just like, it's all trial and error again. So I have to just be like, figure out what works for me. And, knowing that I play attack and I'm primarily my arms are constantly bruised. I find that my abdomen is a pretty safe spot. Sometimes, occasionally the back of my arm is a good spot as well, as long as I wear like a little sleeve sometimes. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well, I actually did bring that up as a point of concern to our sports med doctor, and they're actually in the process of building me like a little donut hole, I guess, essentially for my Dexcom, and then like a little wrap around it. I don't actually have any clue what it's going to look like, but none of it sounds great. So I am excited to see how that works.
I've heard of some very interesting homemade methods for, football players figuring it out within the pads. We had, we tried something that the wrestling coach had kind of rigged up for Benny, but we decided to go with just tape and hope.
Yeah.
I have a nosy question that you do not have to answer if you don't want to. Do your parents follow your Dexcom numbers? Do you share with them?
Yes, they do. They have the Follow app as well. I think a couple of my friends do, and my sister does as well. My sister also attends school with me, so it's nice for her to just have it and be on campus with her. But my parents do have my app. I would say my mom probably checks it the most out of everyone. There are just certain times where she'll randomly text me and be like, "Hey, are you high?" And I'm like, okay, yes, like you can see it on the app. I am high. Like you don't need to text me.
I can't relate to that at all. I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah. Or like, hey, like you're low. Are you okay? Which, obviously is great to just see that, there are times where I necessarily don't want to embrace the struggle of a high or a low blood sugar in front of my peers or my teammates. And so it's nice to just have my core support system be able to empathize with me for that time and just kind of internalize that with me, I guess. But yeah, no, I'm very grateful that they are able to follow my readings at all times.
There's so much going on with diabetes. And again, this is a kind of a nosy question, but I'm curious, did you get any help with the mental side, the emotional side, all that other stuff that goes on with diabetes? How are you managing that?
So I would say for me personally, when, I was first diagnosed, I kind of took it myself, took the reins myself because, I was 18, naive, independent, and just kind of wanted to figure it out on my own. A couple months later, I kind of realized that wasn't necessarily the best approach. And there were a lot of things on the mental side where, I struggled with confidence and, my mental health. And I felt as if the resources that were available weren't necessarily tailored to diabetes specific. And so I think that's something that I struggled a bit with, is just kind of finding that balance of, expressing to someone, or whether it be family, friends, therapists, whatever the case may be, of you don't actually, although you can sympathize with me, we don't share the same experiences. And I think that that's just something that is a little bit hard to illustrate to people. And so I think reflecting on my sophomore year a little bit, it was something that I definitely grappled with, being that it was my first year back off of a gap year and everything. And it kind of went from, having my physical support system surrounding me all the time and, always encouraging me, in that just being thousands of miles away. And, being at school, I felt like I was kind of, back again alone and managing it. One thing that I will say though is, and I guess it took me probably the course of 1 year to really develop that confidence. I think that one of the things that, I had mentioned in my Dexcom U program, the sponsorship video of all the athletes, was that invisible illness reveals invisible strength. And so that's just kind of something that I live by on a day-to-day basis.
That is great. Before I let you go, I know you were diagnosed after you were already a student athlete, but any advice for high school players and their families when it comes to looking ahead for trying to play on the collegiate level? And I guess I'm also thinking about recruiting and disclosing and that sort of thing.
I would say find your community as soon as you can, as soon as possible. I think for me, one thing that was huge was just establishing a sense of community through like social media. Like I had at the peak of COVID, I had a fitness account and I kind of turned it into a diabetes account because I was like, all right, I don't know anyone with type 1. I need to figure that out. Being able to promote, a sense of belonging and trust and security is definitely crucial to not only your diabetes management, but just like the mental side of things. And that'll definitely, of course, follow through when you're playing sports as well. That is part of the reason why I did reach out to Dexcom about, any of their opportunities, because I saw all these people on their Instagram page and I was like, wow, I want to see how they're getting involved. Like, how are they getting posted like this? And I think just trying to learn to vocalize the pains and the ebbs and the flows of your diabetes, because I think one super important piece of advice that I've come to realize is that, it's something that's permanent. And so you have to just kind of find ways to channel it. Luckily, athletes can channel a lot of their, emotional distress through sports. And so I think that that's one great way to go about it. But I think just learning to be confident in your diabetes and learning to communicate it through with, your peers and your loved ones and your teammates and whatnot is going to create a really positive environment for you and help you with your diabetes management.
That's fantastic. Bri, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you don't have a lot of it, so thanks for talking to me and sharing your story.
Yeah, of course, Stacey. I really appreciate you bringing me on. It was so great speaking with you tonight.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
As always, learn more about Bri and about Dexcom U and about the NIL program over at diabetes-connections.com or in the show notes wherever you are listening. Little inside baseball. Yeah, this is 2 episodes in a row about Dexcom, but I got to tell you that this episode was supposed to air last week. We were able to switch things around. I want to talk a little bit more about approvals and changes in technology and some other news that just came through in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And I want to talk for a minute about Control IQ. This is, of course, the Dexcom G6 Tandem t:slim X2 pump software program. We were so lucky to get this very early on when it first came out in January of 2020. And when it comes to Benny's numbers, I hardly expect perfection. I really just want him happy and healthy. And Control IQ has exceeded my expectations. Benny is able to do less checking and fewer boluses and is spending more time in range. I am blown away by his results in what I was told would be his worst time, right? His teen years. I was prepared for him to be struggling. And of course, it's not all rainbows and sunshine, but boy, is it a lot better than I thought it ever would be. And his sleep is better too, with basal adjustments possible every 5 minutes. The system's working hard to keep him in range. And that means we hear far fewer Dexcom alerts, which means everybody's sleeping better. I really am so grateful for this. Of course, individual results may vary. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Facebook gives you those memory look-back posts every day. Well, last week I got one pop-up from December of 2019 that said, "You're welcome, everybody. Tandem Control IQ is FDA approved now, thanks to me," because I had just sent what I thought was the last episode of the year off to my editor. And unless there was some breaking news, I was going to take the rest of 2019 off. Of course, there was breaking news. We did an episode, I want to say a week or two later with Tandem. So this time of year has a history of being quite busy, I have learned. So of course we had Dexcom's approval for the G7. We had a very popular episode I put up just last week. More to come, I am sure. There's so much news that is going to come out from that in terms of interoperability, features, availability, pricing. So a lot more to come. But also, in the last couple of days, you may have heard about Tandem and Sigi. I am efforting an episode on this, but if you saw on social media, I already posted a little bit about this, and I'll go through it really quickly. But I do think this has some really interesting ramifications. So Sigi, we've talked about it here. I've interviewed them. They are a tubeless pump. They are a patch pump, but they are not disposable. You get 2 pods or patch pumps, whatever they're going to call it. You get 2 of them. They are rechargeable. There is an infusion set that goes on the body. That is disposable, and you change that every couple of days, but there's no tube. So it's a very interesting competitor to Omnipod. There's also a button on the pod, at least there was in the product that has received FDA breakthrough designation. So my question for Tandem is, okay, you purchased this company. What happens to the Mobi? What happens to what used to be called the T-Sport, that tiny little pump? Are you going to go with both products? Are you going to go with just one product? Very interesting stuff to look at. And, of course, there's many more questions. But I bring that up because here we are in mid to late December. It's supposed to be a quiet time, but there's always more news. It frustrates me, longtime listeners know, because my whole background is in immediate breaking news, right? Radio and TV news. And I can't do that on a podcast. And I'm not going to try to. It's just not the right medium for it. But I'll bring you as much as I can via social media. Please make sure you're following me. Good time to note, I am still on Twitter. I'm on Twitter with 2 accounts, my Stacey Sims account that I've had since forever, and then Diabetes Connections, which I started when I started the podcast. I'm not planning on leaving Twitter anytime soon. I may revise that. I may have revised it by the time you hear this. Right now, I'm still there, but I have started a new account over on Post, and that is post.news. Still finding my way, like a lot of other people, and I'm only really posting, at least so far, diabetes stuff over there, not a lot of personal stuff. But if you get on Post, find me, trying to get those hashtags going of T1D and diabetes and DSMA. So if you're looking for those, I am over there. But of course, the usual suspects, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, still not on TikTok. You know where to find me. Unless something big changes, we will not have a newscast episode until January. We're done with that for December. But I will have one more long format episode this year. That will be next Tuesday. And it's going to be one of our game show episodes taped earlier this year. Wait, don't poke me. So I hope you really enjoy that. Something fun for the end of the year. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.